Am I wrong about that?
I think so, Your Honor. The fact that 5 individual plaintiffs did file habeas and did get relief indicates that they could...
I don't think you're answering my question.
Yes, he is.
Gang members coming here illegally doing terrible things. And then finally you got this judge saying this crazy decision. Turn the plane around, bring the bad guys back to America. That makes no sense.
Get these people out of our country as fast as we can. They're not immigrants. They're illegal aliens who are committing the most violent crimes you can imagine on Americans.
Trump is in the U.S. Court of Appeals. We're fighting over the deportations that took place. Remember, Judge Boasberg was the judge who said, turn those planes around or else. And he issued a new order that came out from his courtroom in D.C. But then turn our attention to the actual oral arguments that took place today in Washington, D.C., the Circuit Court of Appeals there. And we've got some judges there that we are familiar with. We've already heard from this judge. Judge Karen LaCroix was there today, who is a Reagan appointee, I do believe. We also heard from Justin Walker, and then there was another judge. Justin Walker was appointed by Donald Trump, and then there was another judge who was also there who we'll come back to. But we want to hear what they heard and said today, because they were calling Trump's deportation of these Tren de Aragua, Venezuelan alleged gang members, represented by the ACLU and many others, saying that they were treated worse than Nazis. And of course, that is what you'd expect from the District of Columbia. Here's where it starts. A memo issued in the deportation case coming out of the District of Columbia by Judge Boasberg. We spent a lot of time talking about this guy, and he's very mad about President Trump's use of the Alien Enemies Act to deport Tren de Aragua folks out of the country, back down to El Salvador and afuera out of America. Coming out of the District of Columbia, Judge Boasberg writes, in the pre-dawn hours of Saturday, March 15th, 5 Venezuelan non-citizens being held by Texas DHS sought emergency relief in this court. What's so curious about this too is that it's Texas DHS that had them, and they sued in DC. Why didn't they sue in Texas? We all know why. They justifiably feared that in matter of hours, they might be removed from the countries pursuant to not the INA, the Immigration and Nationality Act, but instead the Alien Enemies Act, a law last invoked in the wake of Pearl Harbor, right? This is an old law. Why are we listening to old laws? You're like, well, the Constitution's pretty dang old. They're like, well, we hate that too. That act authorizes the president to summarily remove natives, citizens, denizens, and subjects of a hostile nation or government when there is a declared war. Now, the president, right, these non-citizens, these Venezuelans, they say that he had signed secretly a proclamation invoking the act, and that as soon as it was published, they were going to get deported. So as expected, later that day, Trump published the proclamation. He said, Tren de Aragua, violent trans-criminal organization that has committed a predatory incursion into the United States, and we're deporting all of them afuera. But they said, no, the government was mistaken. Each vehemently denies being a member of Tren de Aragua. No, it's not us. No, we're just innocent. Several, in fact, claim that they fled to Venezuela to escape the predations of the group, and they fear grave consequences if they're deported solely because of the government's labeling. They then sought a TRO, preventing the government from deporting them or other non-citizens under the proclamation without a hearing, right? Now, this is going to be the big subject of this entire case, really, is due process. And do you have a right to a hearing, a trial? How much due process should we afford to you if you are a non-citizen? They say to preserve the status quo, the judge, until their claims could be adjudicated, this judge, Boasberg, issued 2 TROs that stopped the government from relying on the proclamation to remove people. Now, neither order required the government to release a single person, and this judge is now coping now. He's like, oh, what? You didn't want us to deport him? He's like, no, I wanted you to hold him. Neither order prevented the government from apprehending anyone, and neither order prevented the government from deporting anyone through authorities other than the proclamation. And that's what Trump says. Trump says, we did. We had plenty of other power and justifications to use these people. Tom Homan says the same. Indeed, as the president last month designated Tren de Aragua as a foreign terrorist organization, members of the gang are already inadmissible and thus deportable from the United States under the INA, right? And that's what Trump was saying. Judge writes, now moves to vacate the TROs, primarily on the grounds there's not a sufficient likelihood they're going to win, saying the president's unprecedented use of the act outside of the typical wartime context. We've been invaded by foreign countries for decades now. Finally, somebody is calling it what it is, an invasion, an incursion. The plaintiffs' various challenges, they say, well, just go file a habeas claim. If you're unhappy, just go sue in Texas under habeas. We can't do that. Judge says it's going to be too complicated from them, including sensitive questions about judicial matters. And now the court doesn't need to resolve any any of this. That's because they are likely to succeed on another fundamental theory. The judge says, before they may be deported, ridiculous, they are entitled to individualized hearings, writes this judge, to determine whether the act applies to them at all. And here's my question. Did they get individualized hearings when they were invading our country? As the government itself concedes, the awesome power granted by the act may be brought to bear only in those who are in fact alien enemies. And the Supreme Court and the circuit have long maintained that federal courts are equipped to adjudicate that question. So it needs to be a hearing in front of a judge? Did these people come in? Did they get hearings in front of judges before they invaded our country? So how about we show them the same level of due process that they showed us, or even if they came in legally, that the Biden administration showed them, because the named plaintiffs dispute that they are members of Tren de Aragua. No kidding! They say they're not members of the gang? I'm shocked. They may not be deported until a court has been able to decide the merits of their challenge. How many courts adjudicated the merits of their asylee claims in a court of law by a judge? Well, you're right. You are an asylee. You know, both sides were represented. Okay. In other words, the alien was there and the government was there to say they're not here on asylees. Answer: none of them. In front of a judge and all that? No, Biden was bringing them in hand over fist. That you went to a judge when you tried to deport them, when you tried to kick them out, but they were brought in by the boatload. So give me a break. They can have as much process. We can DoorDash them right out of the country. Stop crying about it, right? If they want to come back into the country according to the legal process and, become citizens, once you become a citizen, that's a whole different ballgame, right? That's a whole different standard. You've now sworn an oath and it's a long time and it's much harder to funnel people through, even though Joe Biden tried to do that. Nor may any members of the provisionally certified class be removed until they have been given the opportunity to challenge their designations as well. The motion to vacate will thus be denied. All right, so that injunction stays in place. Trump cannot deport terrorists. They're entitled to a judicial hearing. Okay, Tren de Aragua are entitled to a judicial hearing because a corrupt hack judge called Boasberg decided to usurp the presidency. Now, this case has gone up on appeal. It's at the United States Court of Appeals for the DC Circuit. And here is a little bit of what happened today, queued up to the juicy bits. The person you're going to hear from are the Court of Appeals judges, along with the Trump DOJ, who is presenting their argument.
Let alone an opportunity to file suit. And so were those removals? I think there was one airplane that you said that was people were removed on other grounds. So there were two where the government hasn't argued that. Am I recalling the record correctly?
Your Honor, I believe so. I mean,
Two planes worth of people removed under the AEA, not under the holding of removal process or removal of the ordinary INA removal.
The Title VIII process. Yes, Your Honor. But I think the fact is that 5 individual plaintiffs were able to march into court, file habeas, actually get relief, admittedly on non-habeas grounds. The fact that opportunity...
Without the government, I mean, that was super fast order that was done, as you know. I mean, the government was called and notified, and then a hearing that afternoon. But that's one of the reasons there's all these separate disputes in district court about compliance, because planes were already loading and taken off. And those folks did not have notice or an opportunity to challenge their status at all. And that's why there's had to be a class certification to slow things down.
Certified Tren de Aragua as a class of people. This judge in the Court of Appeals is saying we had to certify them as a class because they couldn't call their lawyers fast enough to get somebody to file a claim to stop them from being deported. Wild times.
Till we have an opportunity for due process.
Your Honor, I think this court's decision in IM versus CBP is instructive on this.
Am I wrong about anything I just said factually?
Your Honor, I think it's incorrect that they couldn't have gone into court as the 5 individual plaintiffs.
No, but the point here was that there were plane loads of people. I mean, it was a class action. There were no procedures in place to notify people. Nazis got better treatment under the Alien Enemy Act than has happened here, where the proclamation required the promulgation of regulations, and they had hearing boards before people were removed.
Trump is treating innocent Venezuelan migrants worse than the Nazis, is what we just heard out of a Court of Appeals judge's mouth.
And yet here, there's nothing in there about hearing boards. There's no regulations, and nothing was adopted by the agency officials that were administering this. People weren't given notice. They weren't told where they were going. And they were given, those people on those planes on that Saturday had no opportunity to file habeas or any type of action to challenge the removal under the AEA. And like you've agreed that 2 of those airplanes, people were removed under the AEA. What's factually wrong about what I said?
Well, Your Honor, we certainly dispute the Nazi analogy, but more importantly, the fact is that individual plaintiffs were able to file habeas in time in order to secure relief.
Yes,
Wait,
Judge.
what individual plaintiffs were?
The 5 individual plaintiffs that
That's not my question. My question is there were a lot more people. They wanted to bring a class action. They had to have some named plaintiffs. So 5 people filing habeas doesn't help everybody else on 2 airplane loads.
They are their own people. They can go hire their own attorneys and couldn't represent themselves.
Correct? And my question to you is, and you said those 5 didn't get put on the airplanes. So as to the 2 airplanes that I think you just agreed involved removals solely on AEA grounds, on Saturday, the very short time of the proclamation's publication, had no opportunity to file for habeas or even notice as to the grounds on which they were being removed. Am I wrong about that?
I think so, Your Honor. The fact that 5 individual plaintiffs did file habeas and
Yes,
did get
see?
relief indicates that they could.
I don't think you're answering my question.
Yes, he is.
My question is not as to the 5 plaintiffs. I want you to think of 5 other people on the first airplane. How much time, when were they given notice that they were being removed under the AEA on the
Wild.
grounds that they were members of Tren de Aragua?
She's gonna
And
go
how much
hour
time
and
were they
hour,
given
minute by
between that
minute.
notice and being put on the airplane that Saturday, right after the proclamation was signed, file a suit?
Your Honor, those facts are not in the record, and I don't know all of them offhand, but I think
Okay, so
It's a-
go ahead, you think?
I think the fact that 5 individuals were able to do so
No, they
indicates
got
that others
lucky.
could have.
They filed suit before the proclamation was even published. I've asked you after the proclamation was published. And I assume these habeas actions that you're talking about, and correct me if I'm wrong, that are now being filed in Texas, have been filed since there's been a stay.
But Your Honor, I'm talking about
that right?
the 5 individual plaintiffs in this case.
That's not my question.
I
The
understand.
question here is, if someone thinks there was a meaningful opportunity.
Ask them. How'd they do it? How did they get lawyers involved in their case to stop their deportations? Judge, ask them. I don't know. We don't represent them. Ask how they did it so quickly. But the way that this broke down is we had some very astute legal observers out there, including Roger Parloff, not a fan of Trump at all, says hearing in the Alien Enemies Act just ended. We had 3 judges there. Judge Millett, Judge Walker, Judge Henderson. Here's how they break down the 3. Says Judge Millett strongly trending toward keeping the TRO in effect. So the deportations cannot continue to happen until they've got individualized hearings. All of these are just speed bumps in the road to try to slow Trump down. Judge Walker trending against, and Judge Henderson asked no questions. So to be clear, Walker seems to think the case should have been filed in the district court in Texas. And of course, that would make it much more difficult for them, which is why they didn't sue in Texas. They sued in DC because they knew they'd get some favorable rulings there. Margot Cleveland says, so I finished listening to the entire hearing. My initial gut remains. Walker is 100% no jurisdiction because this must be brought in habeas in Texas. Judge Millett is 100% jurisdiction, upholding the TRO, and Henderson's going to be the swing vote. Says, my gut, Henderson, going to find with Walker more convincing, saying Walker can overcome her worst case concerns by saying it will enter the administrative stay for 5 days to allow for appeal, and habeas can be filed in Texas. This will not end contempt issue. You still have a contempt. So the judge is also trying to get Trump held in contempt. And she says, don't think that that will happen with the judge, but good stuff. Okay, so Margot Cleveland also reporting on that. Now, more can be done here. Jim Jordan just came out, made the announcement that they are going to be holding hearings for these corrupt judges. One person who's on the list is Judge Boasberg, who should be hauled in front of Congress to answer questions about what he is doing. Here's what Jim Jordan is planning.
Frankly, there's the broader issue of all these judges' injunctions and then decisions like Judge Boasberg, what he's trying to do and how that case is working. We're going to have hearings on all of that because particularly when you look at Judge Boasberg, it starts to look like this is getting totally political from this guy.
Yeah.
Particularly when you remember he's also the judge who was part of the whole Trump-Russia FISA court granting those warrants that allowed the Comey FBI to spy on President Trump's campaign. So we're going to look at that issue as well. But hopefully we can get that bill passed next week on the House floor, move it to the Senate, hopefully get it to the president's desk.
What do you think you're going to find here? It seems to me like it's pretty black and white. You know, you go, you find the judge that's going to rule in your favor, and it's been going on for 20 plus years.
Yeah, that's why we want to limit it to just that jurisdiction, just the parties of the case, so it doesn't have nationwide implications. But yeah, this is the way the left operates. They go to these judges and they go after President Trump, as the speaker indicated, disproportionately more there than elsewhere. But with Judge Boasberg, think about this. I mean, I think the president, with his order on these gang members sending him back or sending him to El Salvador, I think constitutionally he's on solid ground. Article 2, Section 1, first sentence, executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States. Statutorily, the Alien Enemies Act, predatory incursion, that's certainly what this was.
Heck yeah.
Gang members coming here illegally doing terrible things. And then finally you got this judge saying this crazy decision, turn the plane around, bring the bad guys back to America. That makes no sense. So when you look at all that, coupled with this judge's history with the FISA court, with the sentence he gave to Kleinsmith, the lawyer, Kevin Kleinsmith, who altered the document in front of the FISA court, it really starts to look like Judge Boasberg is operating purely political against the president. And that's what we want to have hearings on, this broad issue and some of what Judge Boasberg is doing. And so we're going to start those next week, and we think Senator Grassley is going to do the same.
Wow. Okay. So don't know if that means they're going to haul him in front of the committee or not. not, or send him a letter requesting his presence, or if they will just bring in other experts, which is probably more likely. They'll just bring in, Jonathan Turley, who's a nice and intelligent and appreciated person, but he's not a person who can do anything to the judge other than comment on what this judge is doing. So we'll see what happens, but Jim Jordan will have some hearings. Got to have hearings before you can impeach him. So at least it's something. So they're back there doing that. We got Tom Homan, meanwhile, saying, we're going to continue to use our alternative sources of power. All right, we're going to find them and we're going to get rid of them. Here's Tom.
We're going to keep arresting TDA members. We're going to keep arresting MS-13 members. We're going to keep arresting public safety threats all this nation. Now, it comes to Alien Enemies Act. If we're going to remove them through that act, we won't have to wait for litigation. We'll simply detain them. But we're going to take them off the streets. And anybody can remove through Title 8. We'll remove through Title 8, which is the order of an immigration judge. But we'll obey the court's order. But I think DOJ, eventually will win that order. Then it's game on. But until then, we're going to keep doing what we're doing of taking these public safety threats, especially TDA and MS-13 members off the street across this country. It's a 24/7 operation, and we're going to continue to do that.
All right. So Tom Homan out there getting after it. And of course, Pam Bondi was also out over the weekend hitting back on Boasberg, saying Americans are safer today and we're not going to let up on these efforts. Here was Pam Bondi, Attorney General.
This is an out of control judge, a federal judge trying to control our entire foreign policy, and he cannot do it. He dragged us into court on a Saturday without any notice, and then he's continuing these hearings. He's trying to ask us about national security information, which he is absolutely not entitled to. We are appealing. We will be in court Monday again. We will win. We will prevail. There are 261 reasons why Americans are safer today, and that's because those people are now in an El Salvador prison. And we are going to follow the law, and we are going to protect Americans. There's a reason why Biden's approval rating was plummeting because of the border. There's a reason why the current Democrats' approval rating is at 29%. People want to be safe. This is President Trump's agenda to keep Americans safe, Maria. It's basic public safety. Get these people out of our country as fast as we can. They're not immigrants. They're illegal aliens who are committing the most violent crimes you can imagine on Americans. Murder, rapes. Ask the parents of all of these young women who have been violently strangled, raped, and murdered. And we are going to continue to make America safe again because that's President Trump's agenda.
All right. So Pam Bondi is, I think, right that we do need to get a handle on the border and get people deported. These people were deported. They weren't charged. And so we're looking to see if charges do come at any point in time. But Pam Bondi is out there supporting the efforts and, of course, pushing back on Judge Boasberg, who deserves it massively. So we'll be here continuing to cover this. We know that the Court of Appeals will be taking some time to rule on this. And when the decision drops, we'll be here to cover it. Thank you for subscribing. Thanks for inviting a friend or family member to come over and join us when we go live. We'll be back here on the next one.